Hello, everyone. I had originally held a training session, which a handful of folks attended, and those that did were given all of the materials they needed to perform window strike surveys for the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, and I was going to post that video to our YouTube channel, but it turns out the video would have been over an hour long, and so I can basically fill you in on all the information you need to go out and collect data for us in a much shorter period of time. So I am re-recording this as a training video and posting it to our YouTube channel at Audubon Society of Rhode Island. So all of you who are interested in helping collect this incredibly important data will be able to do so after watching this video. So I'll just get right to it. Our bird populations are declining, and they have been for quite some time. We know in a landmark study that was published in 2019 that roughly 30% of all birds in North America have completely vanished from the landscape. The major drivers of this decline are identified as things like climate change and habitat loss, but there is no silver bullet anymore with regards to conservation for birds. There are simply so many sources of decline, so many stressors that birds face throughout their annual cycle, that a lot of the decline is occurring because of different reasons, depending upon the species we're talking about. The principal reason we began our data collection on baseline data at the Audubon Society of Rhode Island was to understand what habitats birds are closely associated with, how they use those habitats throughout the year, how the use of those habitats changes throughout the year, in the hopes that we can come up with the most effective management plans possible. And so that's what really prompted the work that went into the creation of our State of Our Birds reports, both the first part, which is inclusive of the breeding and overwintering periods, and then the second part of the report, which is really specific to migration and when birds move through the state of Rhode Island, and more specifically, our refuges that we manage. So many of you helped collect data for that baseline data collection period, and I appreciate your help. And now we are calling on you once again to go out and collect a very different type of data. And that has to do with the other proximate drivers of decline that birds are experiencing. So here's just kind of a list of things that do claim a large number of birds each year. And for many of these items, we still consider them to be relatively low-hanging fruit from a conservation perspective, things that local homeowners, the individual can do that will have measurable impacts on bird populations. And we've actually experienced some success with regards to identifying these sources of decline and doing something about it that doesn't require much in terms of time, energy, or money. So some examples of that: fishing bycatch. An estimated 400,000 seabirds die every year because they are either entangled in fishing line or nets, or they're actually hooked on long line hooks as fishermen play out these, mile after mile of these fishing hooks in the ocean, and are going after these large migratory fish species like tuna. And we found that a large number of birds will actually dive after that bait, get hooked on the hooks, and get pulled underwater and drowned. And it turns out that very simple modifications to your fishing line, such as the implementation of these small streamers, here I'm outlining them, these yellow streamers, by putting these very low cost pieces of plastic streamer on your fishing line, we've greatly reduced the overall mortality that birds experience, at least as bycatch in this industry. Another example is, let's see here. Okay, pesticides. So we utilize a lot of pesticides, whether it's organophosphates or the more notorious version of pesticides that are the most widely used chemicals on Earth, which are the neonicotinoid variety of pesticides that have such pervasiveness in the environment and have caused so much decline in our pollinator and bird species that in many countries throughout Europe, they're banned in terms of their use. They're still used here in the United States, But we know that doing things such as switching your lawn care from, let's say, pesticide-heavy lawn care to one that focuses on organic forms of lawn maintenance is a great way for you to personally ensure that these chemicals don't end up in waterways, downstream, in refuges, affecting wildlife populations. That is inclusive of birds. Feral cats kill between 500 million and just over 1 billion birds every year here in the United States alone. So cat mortality, bird mortality driven by cats is a huge source of decline for many of our bird species, particularly those that tend to nest or forage on the ground. And then what we're primarily, and so doing things like keeping your cats indoors can actually contribute to a dramatic increase in local and regional bird populations. So that's a great example of low-hanging fruit. Not to mention the fact that cats that are kept indoors tend to live healthier lives. They don't contract as many illnesses and parasites. They also live far longer. So the average lifespan of a cat kept indoors is far longer than the average lifespan of a cat that spends most of its time outside. So it's a win-win for the cats themselves, as well as the birds that they prey on. And then today we're really going to focus on windows. So windows, as you can see, window strikes claim up to and possibly over 1 billion bird lives here in the United States alone every single year. The range is between 100 million and 1 billion birds are killed every single year by window strikes. It's a fairly large range, but that's definitely because of the fact that there's not a lot of reporting, which is precisely what we hope to correct here at Rhode Island Audubon with these surveys. We believe that the total numbers of birds that are killed every year tends towards that 1 billion number, just because of the fact that so little reporting is done when birds tend to strike windows, particularly when you consider the fact that 44%, a significant proportion of window strikes occur in residential areas. And so I can take time to talk about how you mitigate these window strike losses by doing things like putting these decals, these ultraviolet decals on your windows that you can pick up at most hardware stores or online, and place on your windows. Or you can utilize these reflective tape strips or reflective dots that you put on your windows and have a much longer lifespan. So just for reference, the decals take, that you have to replace these every 4 or 5 months. These dots and tape strips tend to last years on end before they need replacement. But if you're looking at this video, the likelihood is high that you already understand what the problem is, and you probably already use these decals at your home. And if you don't, hopefully you will shortly. So I'm going to move on to just talk about briefly the other aspect of window strikes, which is that which occurs in urban city centers. So this is an image from the 9/11 Memorial Towers in New York City. And these two beams of light are shining up into the sky. This is at night when most birds undergo migration. And we have massive amounts of mortality associated with window strikes in urban areas during periods of spring and fall migration. Here you can see that the cloud cover is relatively low, which oftentimes forces birds to migrate at a much lower altitude than they typically would. And the lights that you see, these beams of light, actually act as attractants to the birds during migration, much the way that moths are drawn to lights outside of your home. And so all of those dots you see in those two columns of light are actually birds that are disoriented. And when this happens, these birds become so disoriented that they either fly around for lengthy periods, exhausting all of their energetic reserves, and simply fall to the ground so exhausted that they can't refuel and they die of starvation, or they become disoriented and fly into the windows on all of the skyscrapers. So urban bird strikes is a huge source of mortality. If we look at this metric, this graphic here on the right, you can see that residences claim roughly 250 million bird lives every single year, and large buildings inside of urban city centers claim on the order of 340 million birds every single year. So we are looking to address both the residential as well as the urban aspects of bird window collisions. There are already programs in place. There's a famous one that is overseen by the National Audubon Society, called the Lights Out program, in which urban cities buy into the idea of doing what they can to reduce the overall mortality of birds during periods of migration. And so from the hours of 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. during the two peak periods of migration, that which occurs during spring migration largely taking place between the 1st of March and the middle of June, and then again in the fall, which takes place between the middle of August and the end of November. A lot of these cities have agreed to either turn off lights or extinguish those lights by doing things like drawing blinds, thereby not attracting birds to these areas where they might end up flying into windows. So this is obviously a win-win for the birds themselves, but also for the building managers. As you can imagine, a lot of these skyscrapers and urban city centers stay lit throughout the night, despite the fact that no one is in the building utilizing it. And so you're representing a significant energy savings, a lot less carbon dioxide emission from the generation of that electricity. And so getting cities to buy into these lights out programs is not only good for the birds and the other wildlife populations we are concerned about, but it's good for the actual planet and the city itself. Currently, there are 30 cities that are adopting the Lights Out program. This is just a small snapshot of those that do. Portland, Denver, Dallas, Cleveland, Baltimore, New York, and even Boston are just a handful of those cities that actually currently adopt the Lights Out program. Providence does not. And while Providence is a relatively small city, not a lot of skyscrapers, the question that we hope to answer through this research is, does Providence qualify for lights out? In other words, are there a large number of birds that are falling victim to the windows in the city of Providence during periods of migration? So our fall window strike surveys are largely going to be taking place in the city of Providence, and then we are also looking to collect data year-round at residential locations throughout the state to better understand how Rhode Island is contributing to the global problem of bird window strikes. You know, that range of 100 million to 1 billion birds killed every year is huge, and we want to understand, to the best of our ability at least, how birds are falling victim to windows here in Rhode Island. The data collection itself for this type of work is incredibly simple. You're just reporting, unfortunately, a relatively morose statistic of the numbers of dead birds that you are finding that have fallen victim to window strikes. So we'll take these in turn. Residential data collection will take place year-round, and it can take place at your home, at your place of work, or incidental reporting. So if you're at your house when you hear a bird hit your window and you go outside and you find the bird, or if you come home and find a dead bird underneath of one of your windows, you would report that, just the way that you would report it if you go to work and you find that a bird has flown into the window at your place of work and has died, or if you're out shopping, not actively surveying, and you find a bird that has flown into the window at your favorite restaurant, for example. That would be an example of an incidental report that you would submit. Submitting these reports is very, very easy. You would simply take as many photos from different angles of the bird as you can. By doing that, you enable me to better identify the species, the age, and the sex of the bird. So taking 2 to 3 photos of the bird from different angles is ideal. You certainly don't have to touch or transport the bird. Then you would send me the photos at cclarkson@asri.org, which is my personal email address, and I would be able to then log that sighting into our database. Along with the photo of the bird, you would include the date that the strike had happened, the address where the strike has happened, and then you would label your photos in a way that I can determine the date and time of the picture, as well as who it is that's submitting the picture. So here's the format you would use, which is really broken into the year 2023, the month here in this example. It would be November, the date, the 23rd of November, the time of day, 8:34 in the morning, your initials. So in this case, it would be mine, Charles Clarkson. And then if you're sending multiple photos, the number of the photo in the series that you are emailing. Perhaps the most important thing you can do is spread the word. Obviously, the more data we collect, the better handle we'll have on just how much mortality we're experiencing in the state. So while you yourself collecting the data is a huge boon for us, if you can tell your friends, your families, your neighbors that we are collecting this information, it's such an easy data set to collect that they don't have to know anything at all about birds. They just have to go outside if they hear a bird hit their window, take a picture and email it to me. So if you can get your friends, your family, your neighbors, anyone else you can think of to buy into this, the more people we have submitting data, the more we are able to understand what the problem is and how we can address it in the state of Rhode Island. So please do your part to spread the word to anyone who will listen and help submit data. Now we're going to move on to the urban data collection. Slightly more involved just because you're going to be using a really nifty website that's been designed by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, but still, again, relatively easy data to submit. The period for data collection for the urban data collection is just those periods of migration. So fall to begin with, which runs from basically now. You can start these surveys immediately all the way up until the middle of November. And then again, I'll be advertising for more data collection with the pending spring of 2024 migration. So here are the steps to submit your urban data. Step one is to use the Cornell Labs website called Birdcast to determine when you want to perform your surveys. So you simply go to this website called Birdcast by going to birdcast.info. Once you are there, you will be presented with a screen such as this. And at their home screen, as you can see here, they have a 3-night period of national bird migration forecast data. And so by clicking on any one of these 3 nights, you will see when you can expect migration intensity to be the highest. So here we're looking at actually the night of September 8th. So the night of Friday, September 8th, you can see that you're going to have very high densities of birds, which is indicated by these oranges, yellows, and whites throughout the central part of the country. Here in Rhode Island, however, you can see there seems to be a weather front that's preventing a lot of movement. And so we're still in a very low period of migration intensity over the course of this night. So you'll want to go out and survey the morning following anything that's considered a medium or high migration intensity. You can also go down here to local bird migration alerts on the homepage. You can enter the city. You can type in Providence, Rhode Island, hit search, and it will actually tell you specific to that city what your migration intensity will be for the next 3 nights. So you can either use this national map or you can simply look at Providence specific data. Once you've figured out the nights in which medium and high migration intensity will occur, you will then plan to survey the following morning. You'll want to choose a walking transect in an urban area. Ideally, most of this data is going to be coming from Providence, but because Woonsocket and Pawtucket are also urban areas and may in fact be sources of bird mortality, if you'd be interested in surveying either of those locations, you may do so. But the first thing you do before you head out into the field is going to be to figure out your walking transect. So by going to Google Maps, figuring out where you're going to park in the morning, what transect you're going to walk, will make it easier for you. This is not information that you need to transmit to me. I don't need to know the exact route you've walked. I just need to get an idea of what kind of mortality we're seeing inside of the city of Providence. So you can figure out your own route. For me, when I go, actually, I usually park over here. I walk across this footbridge, and then I do a zigzag pattern of surveys all the way downtown throughout all of these buildings, and then I cross back over and I zigzag all the way back to my car. And so it's a transect that takes me about 2 hours to walk, covers approximately 20 to 30 city blocks, does a really good job of surveying all of the major skyscrapers and tall buildings that we have, although we don't have many in Providence. There's no such thing as too much data. So if you go out and I go out and we're all surveying on the exact same morning, more eyes is better. I might miss a bird, you might miss a bird that then gets picked up by someone else. So there is no problem with multiple individuals surveying the city on the exact same morning. You'll want to choose to begin your surveys before both car traffic and foot traffic gets too heavy, essentially the early morning period when the city itself is quiet. It helps you to find parking very easily. Businesses have not yet opened. By the time they do, if there are dead birds on the sidewalk, they are generally removed. So they're swept off of the sidewalks and they're therefore much more difficult to find. So generally, as the sunrise gets later and later as the fall progresses, you're looking at a window between 6:30 and 7:30 in the morning to begin your surveys. When you do your survey, you'll go out into the field using a paper field card. Looks like this, very straightforward to fill out. Just need your name, your email address, the date in which you survey, the approximate number of minutes that you're out surveying, the approximate mileage that you have covered. You can use a Fitbit for this. You can use an exercise app for this. You can use Google Maps to determine the overall distance that you surveyed. And then you want to include things like every single bird species you find, the time you find it, the building where you find it, either the name of the building, if it has a name, something like, let's say, Brown Engineering, or if there is no name affiliated with the building, give me the address of the building, the approximate number of stories. By simply counting the number of windows going up, you have an idea of the number of stories. The building face in which the bird was found, whether it was found on the eastern, northern, southern, or western face of the building. If the bird was still alive. If it is, here's all the information you need to report it to the Rehabilitation Association of Rhode Island. You can then transport the bird there in hopes that they are able to rehabilitate the bird. More often than not, you're not going to be finding a bird that is still alive. If you can determine the sex of the bird, that would be great. But if not, you can just simply put U for unknown. And the same with the age, whether it's an after hatch year or an adult bird. A hatch year, I should not have an A, just a hatch year bird or an immature bird that just hatched out this year, or an unknown. And then the one thing that you will need to sign back onto the internet for is this Birdcast peak migration traffic metric. So going back to Birdcast, when you type in birdcast.info, this is the home page. Down here, you have what's called the migration dashboard. You will put in your US state, so you'll just type in Rhode Island here. And when you do that, you will be given Rhode Island specific metrics on migration. So you will see the total number of birds that crossed over our state over the course of the night. You'll see the expected species that are moving through. You'll get an idea of how many birds have moved through on this season to date. You'll see when the peak in overall numbers of birds came through, which on this night was roughly 3 a.m. And so what I want you to report on that data sheet is this, the peak migration traffic. This metric is going to tell us basically the biggest pulse of birds moving through the state at any given time. So approximately 100,000 birds moving through our state over the course of the evening on the night of September 5th in this example. Then you're going to go home, and ideally that same morning or that same day, if you have the time, you're going to transfer all of the data from that paper field card into a Google form that you will have access to. And then when you submit that, that's it. Your data submission is complete. You do not need to mail me anything. You do not need to take pictures and email me data sheets. You're going to fill out this Google form online, and I will then have all of the data I need. Just going over the Google form itself, it's very similar to that paper field card. You're just going to be putting in your name, your email, the date of your survey, the peak migration traffic, which we just looked at was 98,000, I think 800 for that night. The approximate number minutes of survey that you did, the approximate distance that you surveyed. Did you detect any birds? If you select no because you didn't find a single dead bird, it's finished and you submit it. And believe it or not, that's still data that are useful. So 0 is a useful number to have. If you go out day after day after day and you don't find any birds, that helps us understand that relatively little migration mortality is occurring in Providence. So don't think that if you don't find anything, that's not good data. That's still really good data to have. If you did find species, you would say yes here, and then you would basically put out you would put the species that you detected here. So if you found like a black-throated blue warbler, you would put that in here. And this data sheet would be used for every single bird you detect. Now, in some urban cities like New York, you might go out and you might find hundreds of dead birds in one morning. I am extremely hopeful that you will find none, or maybe one or two birds in your morning. So if that's the case, you will fill this form out twice, one for each of the birds that you detect. But I don't anticipate you finding a ton of dead birds. If you do, please email me immediately because it will be something that I would be very interested to know. For each one of the birds you report, please report again the sex if you know it, the age if you know it, what time you found the bird, the building itself, again, either the name or the address, how many stories, which building face the bird was detected on, how far from the building the bird was, whether it was less than 50 feet from the window or if it bounced off the window and fell a considerable distance away. That gives me an idea of how far away from the buildings these birds end up landing when we start to design these surveys in upcoming years. Was the bird still alive? If it was, did you deliver it to a rehab clinic? And then again, I would like for you to upload photos using this format that is denoting the year, the month, the day, the time, and your initials. So that's it. It's a very straightforward data collection, and I hope that as many people participate as possible. The next step is to email me directly and let me know what you plan to participate in. If it's residential surveys, place of work surveys, incidental reporting, you don't need to do anything other than submit the data as you detect the birds. If, however, you do plan to go out and survey Providence throughout the course of fall migration, let me know, and then I will send you an individual link for that Google form, as well as a copy of the field card that you can print out and take with you into the field. You will need that link in order to then upload the data from your paper field card into that Google form, which again, if it's possible, would be great for you to do this the day of your survey. Okay, so there are no questions because, again, this wasn't a live recording. So if there are questions, you can email them to me at cclarkson@asri.org. Hopefully now you have all of the information you need in order to perform these surveys. And I look forward to getting as much data as possible from as many folks as possible. So please, 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 after you watch this video, forward it to as many individuals as you know who you think might be able to help with the data collection, who might be interested in helping to collect the data, friends, family, neighbors, anyone who's in Rhode Island is fair game for this. We're trying really hard to get as much coverage within the state as possible. And thank you so much for your support of Audubon and all of the work that we do.